Okay, so we're going to pick up this week on session 10 where we left off. I think right midway through. I think we're on 10.11. And as has become a little bit of our tradition, I want to start by just giving thanks to those entities of Ra who brought these teachings through, made them available to us. And for those of LL, the LL research group who both did the channeling work that brought these words through and also continue to steward this material and make it available for seekers all over the world. We collectively give our thanks to those of Ra and those of LL, because without you, we wouldn't be here studying the material. Thanks, y'all. Such a gift. All righty, let's get into it. Question 10.11. Who feels like starting to read?
I can read. Questioner. While an entity is incarnate in this third density, at this time he may either learn without consciously knowing what he's doing, or he may learn after he is consciously aware that he is learning in the ways of the laws of one. The second way, it is possible for the entity to greatly accelerate his growth. Is not this correct? I am Ra, this is correct. Questioner. Then although many entities are not aware of this, what they really desire is to accelerate their growth, and it is their job to discover this while incarnate. Is it correct that they can accelerate their growth much more while incarnate in third density than in between incarnations of this density? I am Ra, this is correct. We shall attempt to speak upon this concept. The law of one has as one of its primal distortions the free will distortion. Thus, each entity is free to accept, reject, or ignore the mind-body-spirit complexes about it, and ignore the creation itself. There are many among your social memory complex distortion who, at this time space, engage daily, as you would put it, in the working upon the law of one in one of its primal distortions, that is, the ways of love. However, if this same entity being biased from the depths of its mind-body-spirit complex towards love-light were then to accept responsibility for each moment of the time-space accumulation of present moments available to it, such an entity can empower its progress in much the same way as we described the empowering of the call of your social complex distortion to the Confederation. Question, would you state in a little different way how you empower this call? I am Ra. We understand you to speak now of our previous information. The call begins with one. This call is equal to infinity and is not, as you would say, counted. It is the cornerstone. The second call is added. The third call empowers or doubles the second, and so forth, each additional caller doubling or granting power to all the preceding call. Thus, call of many of your peoples is many, many-powered and overwhelmingly heard to the infinite reaches of the one creation.
Great. That's a good stopping point. Thanks, Kristen.
Can I just really quickly say I'm kind of confused that they refer to it as time-space and not space-time? Maybe that's...
Yeah, that does get a little tricky sometimes. They'll sometimes use the coupling of time space and space time, and I think they kind of use it in two different ways. Sometimes they're referring to the metaphysical container of space time or time space and those two different realms, as opposed to sometimes they use space time just to mean space and time space to mean time, and in this case they just mean time. So some people there are many among your social memory complex distortion who at this time engage daily. Does that clarify things?
Well, I thought like when they refer to time space, it's more of like the spirit world, whereas space time is more the physical world.
Right.
So when we're talking specifically about actions taken during incarnation, it's just
yeah, that was what I was trying to get at, is that I think that they use that the bundled concept complex of time, space, and space-time, they use them in two distinct ways.
Okay.
Sometimes they do refer to like time space, meaning like the spirit world and metaphysical, you know, the opposite of the physical realm. But sometimes they just use it to mean time.
Time. Okay, got you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
That's my take. You know, I don't know if anyone has a different sense of it, but I've bumped into the same confusion as you, Kristen. And that's my best take on how to read that.
I take it the same way.
Fairlyn?
Are we taking questions?
Yes. Yes.
Let's remove.
Floor is open.
Yeah, it's curious. The call begins with 1. This call is equal to infinity and is not counted, and yet it is the cornerstone. Is that a mathematical concept or mathematical phenomenon I'm not getting?
Okay, so there's two things here. There's they're saying that the doubling with it, what's sometimes called the doubling effect, which they describe in that last paragraph we read, as it applies to our seeking or one's seeking. So in 1013, they're describing the doubling effect, and we have covered that before. And I think Diana kind of cracked the code open for, at least for me. She shared that that reference table where someone like fully described the mathematics of that.
Yes, I remember that. Can I ask a quick question though?
Of course.
Is the call beginning with one person or one call within one call per person? What do you think?
Yeah, Diana, did you want to take that?
Yeah, I do think they mean one entity. And when they say that this one is equal to infinity and is not counted,
yeah,
I think what they're really speaking to is the fact that all is one, right? So of course, if anyone is calling, everyone is calling. However, within the illusion of separation, when we call together, that's very powerful because we have to call in harmony. We have to align our intentions. So it's metaphysically very powerful to call together. And the more people that call together, the more exponentially powerful the calling becomes, because it gets, and Matt, look how easy it is to organize your intentions with one friend. Hey, want to go grocery shopping together? But when you're trying to coordinate, just to put it simply, with 2 friends or 10 friends, there's a lot of conscious work that goes into that and work toward harmony. So it becomes very powerful to do things as a group with intention.
Oh, I get that. I was just curious about the, it's equal to infinity and is not counted, but it's the cornerstone. I can roll with it. It's just like curious to me.
Yeah.
Interdimensional math or something.
Right. Well, Farrell, I think your question is really important and really good. And I'm glad you asked, because this is one of those places where like Don will ask a question and it almost feels like Rod gets off track, like starts to talk about something that's not precisely what Don was talking about. So they describe in 1013, they're describing the dynamics and the mechanics of the doubling effect. But I think Don's question was like, how does that doubling effect relate to one's own seeking? And it gets a little bit lost in translation, I think. So my translation of what they're saying here, what they're unpacking, is that when we consciously realize that we're seeking, when we sort of like, in the very beginning of this little exchange, Don says it's possible for an entity to learn without being conscious of learning, but it's also possible for an entity to learn by being conscious of it. And that's when the doubling effect comes in. So by consciously committing ourselves to making good use of catalyst, and like when we come into an experience where the learning is possible, like, we're having a difficult time seeding whatever we're experiencing into our self in a balanced way. If we do that in consciousness, if we do that consciously, each time we do it sequentially, the power of that conscious decision doubles.
Yep.
So our capacity to make progress on our own polarization process, our own spiritual evolution, is profoundly affected by kind of taking ownership of that, taking responsibility for that, and being consistent with meeting our catalyst consciously.
Yeah, I was taken back to a time when I first consciously remember talking to God, in the middle of a catalyst. And I think I was like 10 years old. And my mother didn't come in to say goodnight, and I was waiting, and she didn't come in. So I was like, okay, God, I'm not going to be mad at her. I won't hate her or something. Something along those lines. And so that, I feel like that's a cornerstone. That would be considered a choice to stick with God, because I knew about God, I knew about love. I got it from my father. It was like he conveyed that really well. Unconditional love. My mom, not so much. So I feel like that was a cornerstone moment. So that's all I wanted to share. It's like,
Yeah, totally.
So it's not necessarily individual they're talking about, but anyway, it's an interesting concept to me, this idea of calling and doing it together and doing it consciously and building upon that. That's really profound to me. So.
Yeah. Diana?
The way that I look at it, yeah, you can call unconsciously or consciously, like Aaron was talking about, and it's more powerful to call consciously. That sort of kicks in the doubling. Or you can call together, because in other places Ross says that what we're calling upon is either the light strength or the dark strength. It's like a polarized, the nature of our calling is polarized, I'm pretty sure. And that's why calling together is powerful, because there's this harmony of orientation, positive orientation, that calls upon the light strength. Kind of in the same way that when you consciously said, you know what, God, I'm trying to really work with this, right? You became conscious of your desire and you were basically calling for that support, I think.
Yeah, it was very strengthening. It was a self-declaration moment. So cornerstone.
Yeah, totally. Any other comments on this portion? Comments or questions on this consciously seeking, this idea of consciously seeking and the doubling effect? I'll say,
sorry.
Go ahead, Kristen.
I just wanted to say how, like, while we're talking about this, it just seems so cool, like the physics of the spiritual physics of creation, like the laws that do have to do with math, but also spirit, and just how cool that is, that it's this blueprint that exists and we get to peer into it, like in some ways still behind the veil, but it's kind of neat.
Yeah, totally. One of the things that came to my mind when I read this part was how being in the metaphysical condition that we are on Earth, where it's a mixed polarity environment, and there's what Ra calls the sinkhole of indifference. In this context, the way I translate the sinkhole of indifference is like, there seems to be in most modern cultures today a standard approach or a default like sense of what we should be spending our time on, and it's materialism. It's like your livelihood, your job, your material attainments. In a lot of our culture, that's kind of, whether it's implicit or explicit, that's what gets held up as what should be, at the center of our lives or something, as opposed to taking conscious control of your your spiritual evolution. Those are independent concepts, but in our world, like, it's not really something, especially in the West, it feels like it's not something that, we're going to be empowered from the outside to remain focused on. And, so not just to, first of all, to take the reins and have that cornerstone experience, like you mentioned, Farrellyn, and like, okay, I'm going to commit to like seeking the truth here. I'm going to commit to like aligning with my heart, my deepest values. I'm going to commit to, living my life as truthfully as I can, that cornerstone moment. But then to keep that in our consciousness, then to keep that like as a, moment to moment, hour to hour, day by day, is is tremendously, and it builds our will, because you have to source it from within. You're not going to just autopilot it, because it's not something that our culture like fully empowers us with. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I think it's one of the dynamics of the sinkhole of indifference is the fact that there isn't a kind of collective prioritization of spiritual evolution. There's a collective prioritization of something else that isn't necessarily supportive of that. And so to find it is incredibly powerful, and to live it is difficult. But if you can, it seems to get easier. We each have the ability to be supported in the power in the doubling effect, which is cool. I wonder if anybody has any experience of that, or any kind of personal insight into like, have you ever felt like the doubling effect in your own seeking?
I have a quick comment and question just for clarification.
Mhm.
So Ra, what he's saying is that the doubling effect isn't only across multiple people, it applies to the same person if he continues it that over time. Is that sort of what he's saying?
Yes, I believe so. And that's why it was a little bit confusing, because they answered it in such a way as though they were talking about that calling of multiple people. But the context that they're saying it is in the context of one person consciously learning their lessons.
And is this related to like, I mean, there are so many books about like building habits, right? Would this be like somewhat similar to that, where like if you continually work towards something, it just becomes a part of your life, or do you think that's related?
That's a great question. That's kind of like that was the nature of my question, is like, how do we actually find that, I was just curious to see if anybody like could correlate this doubling effect and, the building of habits of, meeting your catalyst in a good way to feeling like, oh yeah, I feel it. I feel the doubling effect. That's precisely my question. And I see
I can respond to that.
Great. Go ahead, BJ.
Did you want to respond to that too, Scott, or you have a different? Yeah, go ahead, because you had your hand up first.
Yeah, I don't want to go into a long story, but what I was thinking about as this conversation was unfolding, and what it kept coming back to me is like teepee meetings that I've been into, which is like Native American church ceremony, which is incredibly powerful. And I'm trying to explain the way that it works. And I think this is, consistent with what you're talking about. It's not just an individual thing where like I made a prayer on top of a prayer, but it's like a community coming together to support a prayer. And it's just incredibly powerful. And I've seen the results in my life of extraordinary results transpiring as a result of that. And kind of like the way that it works is like if you want to sponsor a meeting, which I did once, you go to the roadman, talk to him, offer him tobacco, and you tell him what's going on and why you want to put up this meeting. And he considers it and might ask you some questions of this or that. So then when you go, you share it with the whole community when the meeting starts, and it's from sundown to sunup. You sit up in a teepee all night long. It's a peyote ceremony. Everybody knows what the prayer is. So they say, like, if you can get behind that prayer, if you can support it. And I knew this woman that had cancer, and she put up a prayer, because the doctors told her she only had so long to live, and like basically was cured of cancer. Like her cancer was gone. And she told me like an interesting thing. She was like, "Oh yeah, I saw the demon." It was an interesting comment. I saw the demon of cancer, So maybe whatever it was she was like into the spirit world. She could see that aspect of that manifest as cancer. But anyways, yeah, that's just an example. That's what made me think of for sure. Like it's so like ceremony like that is just one of my favorite things in the world. It's some of I talk about it a lot, and I've spent like 10 years of participating in Native American church ceremonies, and yeah, it's really powerful when people pray together. And then also when I went to tracker school at Tom Brown and learning about the elements of power, like it explained everything that I was explained, like it was so fit what I was experiencing in those ceremonies. But that's a whole nother conversation maybe. So yeah, I just wanted to share that much.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that. BJ?
Yeah, interesting experience of doubling effect that I had just on this call when we went into the 90 seconds of self-check. Like because of the because of the regular practice of daily meditation that I have, thanks to the collective, like I just immediately just went like straight to the spacious, still space. It was kind of interesting. Like I wasn't actually doing the like a body scan or a self-check, you know, I was just like immediately like, whoa, there we are in the space. And I've also experienced that with like different spaces. Like if there's a consistent space where I'm meditating or calm, like I can just walk into this space and it feels like it's been charged with that energy. Or with like I have different talismans I feel like can hold a call too. Like I have a crystal heart, a quartz heart, and I have a little tetrahedron thing, like and they both have power for me. So I feel like items or spaces can also potentially hold like prior calls and like double. I don't know if that's true. It might be psychosomatic, but that's what it seems like.
Yeah. Cool. Neil?
Yeah, I have a couple comments, but I remember specifically right after my mom passed, I was trying to get in touch with a medium over the phone, like on one of those apps. And I was having problems getting answers that were believable. And then my dad came up for the first time just to hang out for the weekend. And my wife was also in the room. We all collectively, put the intention, like I want to connect with my mom. And this medium did come through with answers that were very hard to dispute, like her saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry for being stubborn at the end," and just giving us little facts from like childhood. So that was a personal instance. And then I think about like the efficacy of calling, maybe with the banishing ritual and having certain words done a certain way. And like Jim's been doing it for years, so his calling for that's probably very efficient and has worked into, like, I think there was a quote channeling talking about your calling being like a little buzz on the other side, and then when you start calling more and more, it's like the ringing of a telephone until it gets so much that it's unbearable and the call has to be answered. So I kind of think of like inner planes helpers or beings that were once on earth that want to help, and we call to them. And when you get a group, like they're right here just in time space, and then they can hear you easier with the group. So same thing with like Tibetan Buddhism chanting. It's like the same chants for years and years and years. So yeah, I just wonder like the way that we call and what words we use might affect it as well.
Yeah, totally. Diana?
I love all these things that everyone is saying. I just love this conversation. Yeah, I've experienced similar things to what you're talking about, but I'm wondering if anyone was at the Coming Home last year, where Daniel Shields, who is the webmaster of LNL Research, conducted a session on spoon bending. Did anyone go to that? You did. Did you experience the sense, Aaron, of the doubling where it was initially difficult to bend the spoon, but then when everyone worked together, I know people said they had results.
I didn't, but I'm not a good person to ask that. I've got some crazy blockage around that sort of activity. Okay.
Yeah, I think it blew a lot of people's minds. And I was reluctant to go because I'm like, oh, this is transient. But I realized after he was working to demonstrate that principle and had a lot of faith in it. And so when I was a child, I was at my friend Jody's house and somebody said, "You want to play light as a feather, stiff as a board?" Has anyone heard of that? I hadn't. And they're like, "What do you do?" Okay, somebody lays on the floor with their arms by their sides, straight out. And all the other kids in the room, and I think there were like there couldn't have been more than 5 of us, but I think there were 4, stand around the individual and put only 2 fingers under their body from each hand. And then you go in a circle and one person says, "Light as a feather." And the next person says, "Stiff as a board, light as a feather, stiff as a board, light as a feather, stiff as a board." And you're supposed to enter into this like trance state eventually or something. And you're supposed to be able to the person is basically supposed to levitate. And it happened. It happened. And I remember being like, I thought Jody's older brother was like under the kid or something. There was nothing. It felt like no way. And and I think that it was just because we were kids and we probably had so much faith in the fact that this could work, and bam, it did. Yeah.
That's so cool. And your point about, the child, children, and like, there's not as much conditioning and limitation of our belief system, I think. And that seems really true to me. How that affected that work. That's really cool.
I've heard other people say, like, from childhood that has worked as well. My sister actually had an experience like that.
Yep, I did it.
Cool. All right, let's move forward in the material. Let's read 10.14. Anybody feel called to do so?
I got this one. All right, 1014. Questioner. For general development of the reader of this book, could you state some of the practices or exercises to perform to produce an acceleration towards a law of one? Ra, I am Ra. Exercise 1. This is the most nearly centered and usable within your illusion complex. The moment contains love. That is the lesson goal of this illusion or density. The exercise is to consciously seek that love in awareness and understanding distortions. The first attempt is the cornerstone. Upon this choosing rests the remainder of the life experience of an entity. The second seeking of love within the moment begins the addition. The third seeking powers the second. The fourth powering or doubling the third. As with the previous type of empowerment, there will be some loss of power due to flaws within the seeking in the distortion of insincerity. However, the conscious statement of self to self of the desire to seek love is so central an act of will that, as before, the loss of power due to this friction is inconsequential. Exercise 2. The universe is one being. When a mind-body-spirit complex views another mind-body-spirit complex, see the creator. This is supposed to be a helpful exercise. Exercise 3, gaze within a mirror, see the creator. Exercise 4, gaze at the creation which lies about the mind-body-spirit complex of each entity, see the creator. The foundation or prerequisite of these exercises is a predilection towards what may be called meditation, contemplation, or prayer. With this attitude, these exercises can be processed. Without it, the data will not sink down into the roots of the tree of mind, thus enabling and ennobling the body and touching the spirit.
Thank
Let me
you.
pause there, keep going.
Yeah, let's pause there.
I actually wanted to talk about this one because this refers back to what we were just discussing. And what Neil had shared, I love Neil sharing all the quotes all the time, but one of them was a link. He's like, this one was too long and too important. And I was like, yes, that one was huge for me. I even shared it with like 2 other people, and they were like, oh my God, this is exactly what I needed right when I needed it. But basically saying the same thing, that in a sense, we also need to be in meditative state when asking for help. And that one's been bothering me. And I was wanting to talk with you guys about this too, where it's like when we put out the call, there's the conscious call and the unconscious call. And then there's also the it's been said more than once that you need to be in the meditative state. But here he's saying, or they're saying, meditation and contemplative and prayer. And so I'm like, well, are all those wrapped up in just, word complex, verbal complex distortions of our meaning, where, the words hit a certain filter in our own brains, and we see the meaning of the word the way that we see it based on our predispositions towards that word. But for me, meditative versus contemplative versus prayer feel like 3 different states to me. Maybe I'm nitpicking and splitting hairs with that, or maybe it's the idea of being centered. Like, I'm centered when I'm meditating, I'm centered when I'm contemplating, I'm centered when I'm in prayer, but those 3 do not mean the same thing to me. So I really want to hear, when putting out the call, when asking for help, that we keep referring to all the time, that they're just waiting for us to ask for help. How deep of a meditative state do I need to be in when I'm there? Or does it just take, shutting down the monkey mind just enough to get below the surface to then have a more direct, centered asking with your mind energy being in a, alignment, if that makes sense?
Yeah, totally. It's a great question. Do you want to speak to that, Kent?
Yes. Am I muted? Yeah, I am. Well, what she was talking about, Nia, was reminding me of I've been practicing transcendental meditation for many, many years. And for several of those years, I practiced a technique called the city technique, where you would meditate first for like 20 minutes or something. And then after the meditation, so in the meditation, you use a mantra that you repeat over and over in your mind. So you get into a deep state, alpha brainwaves. I can't remember the sequence of brainwaves. What's the deepest? Delta? I don't know. Anyway, you get to a deep brainwave state in the meditation. And then after that, you repeat certain sutras to create an effect within your consciousness. Like one of the sutras was strength of an elephant. Another sutra was lightness of a feather. And I can't remember any of the others. There were like 20 different sutras that you would repeat after you meditated when you were in that state, in that deep brainwave state. So yeah, this section here explains why we did that and how that worked. It was like a prayer or an invocation when you were in a meditative state.
Scott, did you have something to respond to Nia's question?
I did. I mean, that's why I raised my hand.
Great.
So yeah, just a couple of responses. There is my perception of that. Those distinctions or using those different words is partly personal interpretation. Like, everybody has their own understanding of meditation, what that means. I feel like I can be in a meditative state and be in a dynamic contemplation with consciousness or the universe. Because it's like a state of communion. So it might be, you might consider prayer like that. Some people, I've heard also said that meditation is listening and prayer is, speaking or putting out what it is that you want to say to the greater consciousness of the world or whatever. And then I just wanted to, and then go back to what I referenced about the elements of power, at least from that particular school of teaching, because it is like the first one is the sacred silence. And that's what they talk about. And then there's this whole sacred silence meditation. So you got sacred silence, And then there's inner vision, it's called inner vision direction, which essentially is like communication coming to you straight from the source. And then there's the envisioning, is a whole nother thing of like envisioning like what you want to manifest, but it's not, it's distinct from visual. You're visualizing it, but you're also like putting yourself in that future time or something in that state. And there's called absolute unwavering faith and a purpose beyond self. And there's like these 5 elements of power. I just wanted to share that, but the first one is like what they're talking about, that sacred silence, or I think of it as quiet mind. Yeah, that's my response.
Nice. Thanks. BJ?
Yeah, something that comes up for me in response to your question, Nia, is like what it pinged for me is like the difference for me in being in a meditative, contemplative, or prayerful space is like faith. And as compared to more of a mental space, like for instance, this was something that was up for me in the last inquiring together, I guess a week and a half ago or so now. Like, I think one of the things that we were touching on was noticing how when there's the belief that there's a problem, like sometimes we think we need to believe in a problem in order to then solve the problem. And that's a very mental state of mind. That's a very like limited viewpoint. And I think being in a more expansive viewpoint can actually bring in solutions. So to me, it really makes sense to be in a way that's more connected to faith and more expansive. Yeah.
I love that. Thanks, BJ. Diana?
Echoing what BJ is saying very much. I think that to call consciously and to seek consciously is an exercise of the faculties of will and faith. I know Ross says that the work of the spiritual adept and magical work in general is to make that which is unconscious conscious. And the veil separates the conscious mind and the world of our 5 senses from the unconscious mind, which is everything else. It's our guidance. It's every other being and our connection to them. So for me to seek in meditation, contemplation, or prayer, it can be so momentary because it's an active faith. It's the acknowledgement that help comes from a deeper part of ourselves and of the world than the one that we're engaged with in this veiled reality. And the moment you have a desire to like reach for a solution that cannot be apprehended by your senses, you are exercising faith. And I think that's probably, in a way, BJ, maybe what you were saying too, is that faith is that reaching with the sense that there's going to be a result, right? So yeah, I don't think, to be more direct, Nia, I don't think that like you have to go into a deep meditation. I just think that you have to kind of embody that instant moment of will and faith. I mean, if you're on a weird example, but if you're on a plane and it's going down, and you issue some sort of a prayer for a faith or assistance or a sense of peace or whatever it is, I don't think you're not meditating in that moment, right? But you're exercising some faculty that there's more to this picture. And I think it is what the calling is and what the seeking is.
I want to add my little 2 cents to this question. I think it's a really wonderful question, Nia. One of the clues to I think their recommendation, to Ra's recommendation, is in the very first sentence for exercise 1. They say, this is the most nearly centered and usable within your illusion complex. What is the illusion complex? The illusion complex is our, we are sensing all this light. We're sensing all these phenomena that seem to be, that seem to be real. And, on some level, of course, they have reality to them, but there's an illusory nature to them. And if we seek only in the illusion, we're not going to be able to develop a lot of depth, or, we're not going to be able to make a lot of progress. So I think that the foundation or prerequisite of these exercises is a predilection towards what would be called meditation, contemplation, or prayer. It's like looking the other direction. Instead of looking out into the illusion and trying to sense and find the answer through our senses or even through our thinking, there's a different way. And I think it's like looking within, being receptive, kind of like putting our energy towards the mystery, towards the source, towards the creator. And because that's where we're seeking, in all these exercises, we're seeking the creator. And where is the creator? It's like, well, let's, it gets into the mystery really quick when you ask that question. But I think they're talking about look within, point your attention and your awareness within. And there's lots of ways to do that. I wonder if anybody wants to share anything about their experience with any of these exercises. So there's 4 exercises. The first is the moment contains love. The second is see other selves as the creator. The third is look in a mirror and see the creator. And then the fourth is, look at the creation itself and see the creator. Does anyone have anything they want to share? Anything that comes up about those exercises that feels meaningful? Any examples?
I do this from time to time. For me, it seems easier to look at the creation and experience the creator, because it's a little bit easier for me to relate to the experience that we are within God. And everything we interact with is God. And when I'm not focusing on human beings, which I can get caught up in and swayed by different actions of myself and others, it just seems a little bit easier to experience that for me. I use that a lot in prayer too, when I speak to the one infinite creator. And I guess maybe part of it is because I'm trying to contact intelligent infinity. And I will respectfully acknowledge that myself and the creator are the same, of the same origin.
Yeah, nice. BJ.
Okay, so number 1, the moment contains love. I resonate with that one a lot in terms of like, it feels really similar to the practice of inquiry that we've been doing, inquiring together, like specifically finding a stressful moment, where we're not aware of love, we're not aware, we're suffering in some way to some extent, and then being with it, and then being with it with that thought, the stressful thought, and then removing the stressful thought, just being with that moment without the stressful thought, to me over and over reveals to me that the moment contains love. And to me, that's such a powerful practice of finding how the moment contains love, and like trusting, having faith, going into like, oh my God, this thing that really pissed me off and I'm so grumpy about it or whatever, but going in with that knowing that like, okay, I know that everything's okay, and I'm going to find that in this moment. Yeah, that's really humbling, and I really appreciate that. Just finding love in the moment, I feel like is sort of a shorthand for that practice of inquiry. And then in terms of looking out, which I think even looking at myself in the mirror is a form of looking out, because it's looking out towards like physical form. And seeing the creator, something that's really been helping me access that way of being. For a couple of years now, actually, I had this insight through some of my teachers that like it came actually from two different teachers kind of at the same time, like this insight recognition of like kind of associating less with material and more with space, that like if I look at, you know, Diana's image on the screen right now, and I have this thought of Diana being this entity who's, you know, hundreds, I don't know, maybe thousands of miles away, it seems like separation is so real. But when I understand myself to be more to mirror the qualities and the properties of space, then I can, there's a way that it allows me to just drop into knowing oneness. I don't know if this is communicating at all, but yeah. Cool. That's something that's really been with me for a while, like not really associating with things as much as like, oh, more what I am is the space in between everything. And that's the same for all of us. And that's how I can kind of find oneness more readily.
Thanks, BJ. Kent?
Yeah, so this is probably my third read through of this material, and I had not remembered these exercises. So that's a great reminder. I'm surprised I didn't remember them, because it seems to be one of the most important things. The first exercise, the moment contains love. Number 2, the universe is one being. And number 4, see the creator in everything in creation. Those I've been practicing for a long time, and I pretty much do them habitually at this point. Number 3, though, somebody recently reminded me of number 3, gaze within the mirror, see the creator. I think it might have been Diana, possibly. I'm not sure. I can't remember. Yeah, that's one I need to start practicing. That could be useful. So I think I have 1, 2, and 4 down, but I'm glad to be reminded of number 3. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, Sean, I see your hand up. I just want to directly respond to Kent. I think I've shared before in our study group that I have found a really profound relationship in my own life between how I relate to myself and how I relate to the creator. And I think the exercise number 3 is so relevant to this. It's like, what I found is, you know, the bottleneck to my capacity to love and accept myself is the precise resistance to my capacity to find the creator. Like, it's the same thing. I think when we gaze in the mirror and see the creator, it's like, anyway, it's not a metaphor. You know, it's like, it's the truest thing. Like, we are the creator. And so, like, what I found is, like, when I'm not loving myself, it's like, well, of course I can't drop into a deeper love of the creator, because I'm limited right from the get-go by how I'm relating to myself. Anyway, I found a lot of I'm interested in that in exercise 3 too, Kent, and I appreciate your share. Okay. Sean.
To build on to what you said, like one of the reasons I started reading the book that I'm reading, the one, is specifically because I wanted to better understand some of these concepts of like the universe is one being, everything is the creation, everything is the creator. And like previously when I've read these, they've all been sort of abstract concepts, like, oh, like everyone's one. Like, what is that? Like, what does that mean? To at least for me, the way I process information, to know that like there are now more and more actual physical experiments that are demonstrating that at a fundamental level, there is no separation. The universe, like there are starting to become experiments where like space isn't non-local, which means like what that means is you can interact faster than the speed of light across vast distances, because it's our universe is not a local universe, which means you can do something now and instantly affect something on the opposite side of the universe. And these properties where there are experiments that are showing that everything that we experience, like space and time, is produced by relationships among, like it's different perspectives of basically one connected being interacting with itself. And the fact that that there are now there's starting to become more and more evidence of this, it helps me realize like, oh shit, like it's not just like some like religious hokey pokey, like, hey, we're all one. Like this is a real reality. And like we're literally just a perspective of this one infinite, like the ultimate reality has no space or time. There's no change. There have been some like, the first time I read that it kind of blew my mind that like they did all these equations and the time variable like literally dropped out. Like it stopped existing. But that really helped me like sort of internalize some of these, that like, oh, it is the fundamental reality of like what our universe is. One comment, and I really appreciated what BJ was talking about, part one, was like the part that I don't fully understand yet is like understanding what it means to see love in every moment. Like there's a lot of like, we go through difficult periods. Like there are times when like things just really suck, or we deal with really difficult people, and like I don't really know what that means. Like what does that mean to like see the love in that? Like and I think what BJ said really helped, but this is also something that like I talked about with Aaron, where it's like, yeah, scientifically you can prove that everything is one, but like you still need that love. Like science still hasn't quantified what love exactly is. And that part is really important.
Let me just respond real quick to that, Sean. This gets to the very first step that Ra describes as how the universe comes into form. They call it the first distortion, the law of free will. They also call it the law of confusion. Huh, that's interesting. The law of free will is the law of confusion. And it's that precise step, it's that precise mechanism where the creator goes from an infinite being where all perspectives are blended and merged to create a condition where it can think it's separate, to create a condition where it can take a perspective. And that thing you said about perspectives, we're each occupying a perspective. That's so fundamental to understanding the creation, is like realizing that we are occupying a perspective that is unique somehow and independent from the other, from each other's perspectives. But that's the whole point. That's how the whole thing is driven, by that first step. The law of free will is the creator giving itself permission to be confused, to think that it's separate from itself, so it can take a perspective. Otherwise, it can't have relationship or contrast.
Yeah, the birth of these theories was someone imagined an atom and taking the perspective of like an electron inside the atom, and that's how like some of these theories, because once you enter, there are certain properties that don't exist if you just look at the atom, but they arise when you imagine you are a particle within the atom, and then suddenly space and time start existing, which is kind of mind-blowing to me. But yeah,
cool. Neil, what you got?
I've noticed with seeing others as the creator, I use it as a social anxiety tool. So when I'm at work with kids, and especially like young babies and new moms that are stressed and the babies are crying and things are hectic, I'll get into that space of like, okay, I'm the creator, they're the creator, and it moves me out of this mindset where I'm sure that my aura energy is just frantic, and then I get to this place of, nope, this is the creator experiencing this moment, it's a divine moment, and it just seems to shift them as well. And I also see like people around the room kind of, it might just be timing, but I'll look and they're looking at me and I'll be like, why is multiple people looking at me right now? And it happens right as I do this whole inner monologue of, I'm the creator, you're the creator, everything's a creator. And it just kind of shakes me out of that real anxious, everyone's thinking about me state.
Yeah, totally. It's so powerful. All these exercises are so powerful. Neil, I'm curious, how did you, if you're willing to share, how are you able to cultivate the practice of remembering to do that when you're in those stressful situations? How did you get there?
Probably trial and error and just suffering, like constantly worrying about what people are thinking, and then trying one thing, trying another thing, and finally it just gets to the point of like, all right, I'm in the same situation. People are looking at me. I'm stressed about what they're thinking. What can I do? And I'm like, well, you're the creator, I'm the creator. Like, we're the same thing. Why would I be worried right now? Yeah, just through years of constant anxiety, is just getting to that point of like, how do I end this? And this seems to be working.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. Diana?
Neil and I were actually just talking about this at one point. I feel like when I really fail to treat others as the creator is when it doesn't even occur to me to try. Like when I'm triggered enough, I don't notice that that's the work of the moment. And I try to think up ways to remember. And I have a bracelet that is heavy and made of like semi-precious stones. So it's cold and it's smooth and it's heavy and it kind of jangles. And when I'm going to a particularly difficult meeting or something, I will wear it because the sensory experience is a constant reminder for me to seek the creator. And there's like a heart on it and whatever. But I was just saying there's those little bands that they make for people who have ADHD or whatever that vibrate, and you can set them to various intervals, and it just sort of reminds you to do a check-in with yourself. And sometimes I just want to get those just so I can feel like, am I seeking the creator in the moment? Oh, right. Every second is an opportunity, every second. And it's so easy to forget. So I'm very curious if anybody else has strategies about how to remember. But I think that's why people get tattoos and stuff on their arms sometimes. It's because something is really important to them and they just want to look at it.
Yep. Nia?
The what would Jesus do bracelets? What would Ross say? But I used to have that, and I had a friend that I really looked up to, and she's 10 years older than me, and I'm not Christian, and I haven't been since I was a child. So that was like not working for me. And I was like, what would Casey do? Because she was just this goddess to me on walking incarnate on earth. I was like, she's amazing. Everything out of her mouth. I want to be like her when I grow up, you know? And it was just like, what would Casey do? So it was like, in this case, it's like, what would Ra do? Or what would Ra say? Or something like that. You know, what would Ra suggest? But I have those moments too where it was like, I know I shared this before, I'll make it really quick, but this was the big one for me. You know, my mom had a surgery recently. She fell and broke her arm, and we were in the ER for 7 hours, and it was late. Everybody's in pain and cranky, and there were some very questionable people on the other side talking very loudly, and the people, you know, were like, people were like making judgments with our eyes, looking at each other like, really, she's saying all that out loud? And you know, it was like suddenly we got into, you know, I forget what I had said, but I was like, no, I was irritated and I was changing this moment, darn it. And I decided in that moment, and I was like, okay, heart, brain coherence, radiate the love. And I just took a moment to just poof my light out, you know, just raise my vibe and see everybody as creator. And all of a sudden people started talking to me. And then we started talking to other people. And the next thing you know, we spent the next 3 hours chatting and just like, oh, I hope everything's wonderful for you. And it literally turned into like people were just like this too. We're all good friends now, not really, but like, you know, in the moment we were seeing each other and uplifting each other, and it turned an exact opposite polarity from this. I am so separate and judging this person on the other side of this private thing, and holy cow, she's announcing that to the whole thing. And then we all shifted. You know, I'm not saying like I did that, but the intention happened, and then it happened. And it changed everybody's experience, because in that one moment, I was like, okay, we're all creator, we can do this. That was that moment of like, you know, in the fire, I needed to shift that, and that's when it shifted. So I'm getting you I'm looking at you, Diana. I'm getting you bracelets.
I love that example, Nia. I love how it really showcases like how we can transform a moment, you know, in ways that is surprising with our intention and with, you know, with leaning into the love that's there and that we are.
Hi, Echo. And yeah,
Echo
what you said,
joined?
Neil. Yeah, he just joined.
Yay.
Hey.
Hey, Echo, welcome.
And Neil, I want to acknowledge your story too. That was that moment of holding space for especially upset babies and really tired, frustrated moms. Holy cow. That moment alone of mental support, in that I can tell you, like you said, you saw it radiate out, you saw it shift what could have been a really hard catalyst moment for a lot of people into, you know, the subtle intention. That intention shifted the vibe. Like we've all touched on that a little bit here throughout the conversations today, but like a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here. And it's that intention setting legitimately changes the vibration of the brain, which legitimately changes our frequency out and what we're radiating. And that we make our reality, you know. That was awesome.
Kent?
Yeah. So this whole discussion reminded me of something else. I was in a relationship for 4.5 years that I experienced as being very emotionally and verbally abusive. And that whole relationship actually, I mean, there were so many beautiful, wonderful lessons I learned from that. And an additional one that this whole discussion reminded me of was that I had to find the love in each moment, or in the spaces in between. I had to constantly remind myself to find the love in all the spaces in between and in each moment during those 4.5 years. So that was a very valuable learning experience and lesson for me. And also to see the creator in everything, including my partner. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, I'm gonna keep us moving through the reading. We're gonna move on to 10.15. I'll read this one. Don says, I was wondering about the advent of the civilization called Atlantis and Lemuria, the way these civilizations occurred, and where did they come from? Inaudible civilizations. Ra, I am Ra. This is the last question of this work. The civilizations of Atlantis and Lemuria were not one, but two. Let us look first at the Mu entities. They were beings of a somewhat primitive nature, but those who had very advanced spiritual distortions. The civilization was part of this cycle, experienced early within the cycle at a time of approximately 53000, 53,000 of your years ago. It was an helpful and harmless place, which was washed beneath the ocean during a readjustment of your sphere's tectonic plates through no action of their own. They set out, those who survived, and reached many places in what you call Russia, North America, and South America. The Indians, of whom you have come to feel some sympathy in your social complex distortions, are the descendants of these entities. Like the other incarnates of this cycle, they came from elsewhere. However, these particular entities were largely drawn from a second density planet, which had some difficulty due to the age of its sun in achieving third density life conditions. This planet was from the galaxy Deneb. The Atlantean race was a very conglomerate social complex, which began to form approximately 31,000 years in the past of your space-time continuum illusion. It was a slow-growing and very agrarian society until approximately 15,000 of your years ago. It reached quickly a high technological understanding, which caused it to be able to use intelligent infinity in a less informative manner. We may add that they used intelligent energy as well, manipulating greatly the natural influxes of the indigo or pineal ray from divine or infinite energy. Thus, they were able to create life forms. This they began to do instead of healing and perfecting their own mind-body-spirit complexes, turning their distortions towards what you may call the negative. Approximately 11,000 of your years ago, the first of the what you call wars caused approximately 40% of this population to leave the density by means of disintegration of the body. The second and most devastating of the conflicts occurred approximately 10,821 years in the past, according to your illusion. This created an earth-changing configuration, and a large part of Atlantis was no more, having been inundated. 3 of the positively oriented of the Atlantean groups left this geographical locus before that devastation, placing themselves in the mountain areas of what you call Tibet, what you call Peru, and what you call Turkey. Do you have any brief questions before we close this meeting? Any questions or comments on that?
Turkey. Who are the indigenous peoples of Turkey? Persia. It's old Persia.
Isn't I can't never say it.
Göbekli
Nia, say it for us.
Yeah.
Göbekli Tepe.
Thank you. I can never say it. Isn't that in Turkey?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also the Kurds live in the mountain regions of Turkey. And the Kurds are an interesting people. I read an article about the Kurds in Syria, I think it was, forming their own autonomous region. And it was quite incredible, the society they formed. Very egalitarian, very between the sexes and between, the different, rich and poor, whatever. Anyway, I wish I could remember more details, but it was fascinating. Yeah.
Cool. Sean?
One thing that I've never been clear about, and maybe it is clear, was like, so Atlantis, like, is it like it's a physical place in our plane, like literally, like I could go wherever it was. I'm guessing it's somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, and at the bottom there are like physical ruins there, or is it like in some like different plane? Like, yeah, I guess that's my question.
I think it's very real. Or was very real. I mean, Plato talked about Atlantis. There's lots of, ancient historical references of people talking about Atlantis. It's not very contentious, except that it is, except that it like has become contentious. But I mean, I think it's pretty well established that it was a real place.
And the other thing that like, so in the same way that like, Don just like couldn't believe UFOs in the beginning. Like I'm still like, it's hard for me to wrap around the fact that there were things enough to like sink a continent. Because I don't think we currently have anything. We have nukes, but I don't think if we set off a bunch of nukes, it would sink a continent. Like whatever, like the amount of energy required to sink a continent is like, that's massive. Like it makes me wonder like what kind of stuff they were messing around with to like sink a continent. That's a lot.
Yeah. Well, they talk, I mean, there's a clue here. They do talk about this in other portions of the material too, but they talk about the manipulation of intelligent infinity and intelligent energy directly. I mean, that's a whole different kind of tech than nukes. I mean, I don't have the answer. It's definitely it's an important point you make, but they say elsewhere that they were using crystals and they were able to like directly manipulate intelligent infinity and intelligent energy with crystals. I mean, it's some pretty powerful stuff. Kent, did you have a direct response to Shang's statement, or are you just in line? It looked like maybe you wanted to respond directly.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I do. And I don't know, Scott and Fairlin might have been before me, Diana, I don't know. Anyway, I wanted to say what you just said, Aaron, that they used crystals, and that's probably, they misused them and channeled too much energy through them. That's my understanding. And also the location of Atlantis, there are many different theories, you know, where it is off the coast of the Bahamas, for example, is one theory. Plato described it as perhaps being, well, he described it as being outside of the Pillars of Gibraltar, I think. But then the island of Centauri, what's it called, Centauri or something, in the Mediterranean, bears some semblance. They have these ringed walls around the city there. That sounds very similar to what Plato described. And there's another theory that it's just simply the continent of Antarctica, and that there was a pole shift, and Antarctica got inundated and covered with a sheet of ice. And that Antarctica is actually the old location of Atlantis. That's another theory.
Right.
So there are many theories. Yeah.
Lots of theories out there.
Right.
Thanks, Kent. Diana?
My comment is a little bit new, so if anybody else has something to say pertaining to what Shang brought up, I would like to let them stay on track with that.
It looks like maybe Fairlin?
Yeah, I just read the other day that the name Appalachia comes from what is part of what was it Atlantis that's now in the North Atlantic underwater. That name Appalachia just came up. And also Edgar Casey, I think, said that the Azores and Bermuda were part of Atlantis. But then I have a question about the intelligent infinity. So did anyone want to keep talking about Atlantis? But that's a cool thing about Appalachia. I'm gonna look that up. Why Appalachia? How that name got to be on these mountains.
Let us know if you find something juicy. That sounds interesting for sure.
Okay. I have a question about the high technological understanding in Atlantis.
Okay.
I don't understand what Ra means when it's at the end of that paragraph where it says, it reached quickly a high technological understanding which caused it to be able to use intelligent infinity in a less informative manner. Does that mean they made mistakes? Is that what they're referring to? Less informative manner.
I think the way I take that is like, instead of like learning about the nature of reality, learning about themselves, learning about what we truly are, they were using it to, create, I don't know exactly what it means, but create life, forms of life. So instead of like using it to become closer to the creator and learn about the creator, they were using it in a different way.
Yeah, and then then they
I have a
manipulate.
take on that too.
hmm
That comment, it might be different than this, but it reminds me of a portion of the autobiography of a yogi where he's going around to different like gurus basically, and all these different gurus had different like cities that they had cultivated, like the ability to bilocate or to, you know, whatever, like they had these like special like parlor tricks, but it wasn't actually helping their followers evolve. It kind of sounds like that to me, like, oh, they figured out like cool tricks that they could do with it, but it wasn't, it was more transient. That's
Yeah.
a way that I took it.
Yeah, makes sense. That's a good metaphor, BJ.
Yep.
Okay, let's get back to the stack. So Diana, what do you got?
Thanks. In the study group forum on Telegram, a question came up about whether various groups from other places followed various physical genetic lineages here. So whether one race of people might actually embody the consciousness of someone from a particular planet. And I think this section gives a clear answer to that. So Ra says that 53,000 years ago, there were entities from Deneb who basically came here as Lemurians to continue their evolution. Later in the text, Ra says that 25,000 years ago, there were entities from Deneb who came to China to live in Chinese bodies and continue their evolution. So you have Native Americans from Deneb and you have Chinese from Deneb. And both of them are, maybe only one of those is what we would consider Lemurian in our history, but both of them have a consciousness from the galaxy Deneb. Just thought it was a helpful thing to maybe point out.
Well, and it just continues to underscore the tremendous diversity of the soul origins of humanity. Yeah, and it's interesting when they say these particular entities were largely drawn from a second density planet, which had some difficulty due to the age of its sun in achieving third density life conditions. That's kind of fascinating. If we had more time, I'd maybe want to unpack that, but I think I'm just registering that interested me. But for the sake of getting through, I would like to get finished with this session today if we can. So let's have someone read 16 through the end, 10, 16 through the end. Someone willing to do that? Kent?
Unmute. Do you have any brief questions before we close this meeting? Questioner. Only one, other than what we can do to make the instrument more comfortable. I have only one other question. I would like to have a brief information of the word you use, galaxy. I am Ra. We use the term known to your people by the sound vibration complex galaxy. We accept that some galaxies contain one system of planetary and solar groups. Others contain several. However, the importance of the locus in infinite time-space dimensionality is so little that we accept the distortion implicit in such an ambiguous term. Questioner. Then would 9 planets and our sun we have here in our system, would you refer to that as a solar galaxy? We would not. How many stars approximately would be in a galaxy? It depends on the galactic system. Your own, as you know, contains many, many millions of planet entities and star bodies. Okay. I was just trying to get to the definition you were using for galaxy. You mentioned them a couple of times and it seemed to me that inaudible. What you call a galaxy, we call a planetary system. Is there any way to make the instrument more comfortable? I am Ra. This instrument could be made somewhat more comfortable if more support were given to the body complex. Other than this, we can only repeat the request to carefully align the symbols used to facilitate this instrument's balance. Our contact is narrow-banded, and thus the influx brought in with us must be precise. I am Ra. I leave you now in the love and the light of the one infinite creator. Go forth, therefore, rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one Creator, Adonai.
Yeah. So they do eventually get to the, there was some confusion because Ra would use the term galaxy in the context of what we would call solar system. They kind of use them interchangeably.
Right.
BJ, did you have your hand up? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I've heard Jim refer to those comments from Ra about the alignment of the appurtenances or the items, that they later took that to mean 10 to the alignment of your questioning. And when you're asking questions that aren't aligned with the law of one, that impacts Carla's experience. Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that I think I've heard that from Jen, like that was like their interpretation later on was like they look back and like, oh, maybe it was less about where the chalice was or where this was pointed and more about be careful of your own alignment and questioning.
Yep. In Ra's first response to Don's question about galaxy, they say, we accept that some galaxies contain one system of planetary and solar groups, others contain several. However, the importance of the locus of infinite time-space dimensionality is so little that we accept the distortion implicit in such an ambiguous term. Curious if anyone has any thoughts about that. And it's also curious that they don't quite, in this session, they don't quite get to the bottom of the answer that Don's asking. Anyone have any thoughts about that?
My thought was more or less the same thought as you, perhaps, which is like, what the hell are they trying to say? Or what the heck are they saying? I mean, that's literally what I thought. I was like, what?
Well, they say that the term is ambiguous. Maybe they mean that they use it ambiguously.
Diana?
Yeah, the words are hard though. I mean, outside of the illusion, it's all happening in one place, so to speak, or non-locally, right? So I view galaxies as sort of concentrations of intelligent energy that are generative.
Yeah, like where do you draw the line of universe and galaxy and so forth? It would take too long to explain to us, I think. I think it exposes the limitations of our earthly celestial knowledge.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah, they, just like they expose in a different portion that they don't see us, they don't see people on Earth as separate. They don't perceive it that way. We perceive it primarily. It's our primary mode of perception, but they don't perceive it that way. And I think this tilts towards suggesting a similar thing in terms of the galactic structure, like you were saying, Echo, like galaxy, sun, like what's the difference? It's all one being. But there's also a piece where, like, later on when they're talking about the logoi and the fractal nature of logoi, there remains this sort of mysterious sense of like our sublogos, our solar logos, is like equivalent to the galactic logos. Like, of course, there's different scales, but it's the same being. And I think that's part of why they use them interchangeably, because the galactic logos and the solar logos are part of the same entity or expression of the creator or something. Anyway, I mean, it seems like a pretty major distinction from my perspective and from our perspective and from Don's perspective. Like, wait a second, are we talking about a solar system or a galaxy? These are profoundly different scales. But Ra's like, meh, one infinite creator.
I agree. And my little example goes to, Don asks the 9 planets. Well, because back then Pluto was considered a planet and now is considered a dwarf planet because our scientific scales shifted to, oh, really, Pluto is orbiting way out there, and actually there's hundreds of other little Plutos more in or Pluto than we thought. It was just our perception of where Pluto was for us that we could see, and it looked to be in our little mini solar system. And so the fact that our scientists even changed the name of Pluto being identified as a planet versus a dwarf planet versus like that right there kind of sums it all up as far as like it's a the term this is so irrelevant to the law of one, dude. it's what I keep hearing around my head, like, okay, focus. The intention of the questions for the law, we don't care what you call a solar system versus a galaxy versus, you know, it's like you said, their scale is so zoomed out. And the perfect example is Ra not seeing us as separate entities, like seeing us as, you know, all of us being a mind complex. Yeah, so that pretty much, like, in short, is like human terminology via scientific description and definition, kind of irrelevant.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think it's next session, they do get to the bottom of it. They do eventually say, oh, yes, we were using the term galaxy. We meant to say, you know, we meant to be referring to solar systems. So. Any final questions, comments?
I love the history. I love the like synopsize, like, you know, I can't wait to know more about Deneb anyway.
Yeah, we only get tasters. There's all these there, you know, there's a fair amount of non-terrestrial origins that are named. Not many, but we don't ever go deep into it again because it's, from Ra's perspective, it's transient, but fascinates me too.
And Ra was talking about Lemuria at one point in the contact, and the tape ran out. Or that, yeah, or the part of the tape was lost. I don't remember which. So
yeah,
they said some stuff we never got.
Mm.
One thing that might be interesting is both the Indian Native American civilization and the Chinese civilization both have the concept of elements. Though I believe the Native Americans believed in 4, and the Chinese talk about 5.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
And that was their way of explaining like a lot of the forces of like spiritual physics was through the elements.
Mm-hmm. Nice, great session, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone, for contributing and being present and holding this beautiful space together.
Yay, Ra.
Yay, Ra. Ra, Ra. Okay.
Rama.
Well, we'll pick up again next week on session 11.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, everyone. Love you all.
Love you all.
Bye.
Love y'all.
Oh, there's a session tomorrow. Wait, Aaron, you was going to mention
Oh,
session tomorrow?
Oh,
I did. I mentioned it at the beginning, but there's a special session with Scott Mandelker tomorrow morning at 8 Eastern, 8 to 10. And I'm going to put the link to the Zoom on Telegram right now.
Is it okay to
8 a.m. Eastern time.
Is it okay to pop in? Sorry.
He's a gem. He's a Law of One scholar. He used to live with the LL group. He's deeply steeped in this material, and he's put like hundreds and hundreds of hours of his lectures on the Law of One on YouTube.
What's the topic tomorrow?
It's spiritual praxis, living the law, like how to apply. It's basically it's similar to the exercises. You know, it's like, how do we live it? You know, how do we go beyond just studying it, and how do we actually apply it? We'll hear Scott's perspective, and you can just bring any questions he's very open to questions on the fly too. So if you want to come and just have a question, please bring it.
Is it okay, Aaron, to come in a little bit after 8?
Sure, that's fine.
Anytime. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
And we're going to record it too and post it. So if you can't make it, that's okay. We'll put it up.
And the link is on the website, or where do I?
Not yet. I'm going to post it on Telegram. BJ, did you
Nice.
want to say something about that? Okay. All right, y'all. Hopefully we'll see some of you in there tomorrow. If not, we'll see you around. See you around the ethers.
Bye.
Thank you. Love you guys.
Sayonara.
See you next week. If
See
not
ya.
soon.